Okay, so the first thing, oh, my slides, it's taking a second for my, I think our slides are running a little slow. There we go. So first thing I want to talk about, and I think it's why employee engagement is such a hot topic right now. I talk to business owners and what we do across all industries. I talk to small business owners, mid-sized business owners, large business owners across multiple industries. And everyone has been talking about the Great Resignation. To the point where I'm sure many of you like me are probably almost sick of hearing about the Great Resignation. But I think it's hard to talk about the importance of employee engagement and retention right now without talking about the trends that we've been seeing over the last year. So specifically last year, there were millions of Americans who left their jobs. You know, there was a run rate for a while in like the late summer, fall of last year, where about 3 million on average Americans were leaving their jobs every year. And I think according to the DOL, it was about 40 million Americans left their jobs in 2021. So, you know, so many organizations, I'm sure if I asked for a show of hands of who on the call has lost team members, we would probably see a lot of hands go up. You know, almost every organization lost someone in 2021. And the question is why? And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. Some are, I think people felt like their jobs were threatened. The safety and security that they felt in their jobs previously suddenly wasn't there. And they honestly were scared and felt like they had to jump to a new job. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. I also think that there were a lot of professionals out there who, you know, it wasn't so much a great resignation as a great reflection. I think so many times, especially as someone coming from corporate America, it's very easy to get kind of caught in that daily grind or on the hamster wheel of the day-to-day and not give a lot of thought about why you're actually doing what you're doing day-to-day. And I think in those first couple, months of the pandemic, when things kind of slowed down, it was weird because for me, things got really busy, but also kind of slow at the same time. We weren't in that typical routine. We weren't running to the office every day. A lot of us were working from home or taking a bit of a pause. I think it really made a lot of people stop and think, why do I do what I do? And is this something that I want to do for the rest of my career? And I think what I saw in talking to a lot of employees during exit interviews is there were a lot of people that just realized in the last couple of years as they self-reflected, my job isn't necessarily the right long-term fit for me, for my family, or for the needs that I'm looking to meet. So I think that's really where the Great Resignation kind of came from, was that combination of people leaving because they were scared or concerned their job may no longer be there, but then also people just choosing to go in a different direction. I think the key point in all of this is that so many employers were so focused on the people who were leaving and then recruiting in new people to replace those people that there was a tendency to kind of forget about the people who stayed. So where I think employee engagement and retention is so important is, while you as a lead business leader, a hiring manager are busy, offboarding the people who are leaving your organization or onboarding the new hires, it's important not to forget those key players who really make your business successful day to day. So what is the cost of employee turnover, and why is it important that we kind of, I hate the phrase, but stop the bleeding and making sure that we're keeping the people on our team in our team? The cost of employee turnover is very high. So the hard costs are high, from a dollar sense. So the Department of Labor says that when someone leaves, it's about 1/3 of their salary is the cost to replace them. The Society for Human Resources Management says it's probably more like 6 to 9 months of salary. So especially for some of the higher level professional positions, that can be a very significant amount of money. There's also fees involved in terms of search firm fees and the recruitment ads and the administrative time. So, I mean, there's that dollar cost, but then there's also the soft cost, which I think is something not to forget about, because it really does have an impact on the team, even those members that maybe aren't writing the checks for the hard costs, but everyone who's helping exit employees, who's helping train employees, lost morale. I think what we saw in a lot of teams is that they were short-staffed last year. It put a lot of strain on those employees who stayed, which decreased their morale. So there's just a lot of cost to employee turnover. So I think that's where, making sure you're engaging and retaining that team who remains is so important. One note that I will add is not to forget that there is some good turnover. So, I mean, we're talking about regrettable turnover, but I think what we've also seen in the last year, again, is people reevaluated. There's some people who left their jobs who really weren't all that engaged or committed to their job to begin with. So, sometimes having a percentage of the staff leave that maybe aren't really meant to be on your team long-term isn't necessarily a bad thing. The key is to holding on to those people who are a great fit, are engaged, and are your contributing team members. So I want to pause for a second before we really kind of dive into employee engagement. And again, I know not everyone's comfortable speaking up, especially on a recorded session, but if you wouldn't mind kind of looking at these statements and filling in the blank for one of these statements, and if you so dare, I'm going to give you a few seconds, put your response in the chat. So go ahead and read through those. And if ever, you don't have to answer all three, but if you can just put a quick response in the chat for one of these statements. Okay, so I see I get pumped up and look forward to going to work when I'm appreciated, when I get to see my team succeed. Any others? Susan, I'm going to pick on you since I can see you. Would you be willing to complete one of those statements?
I was just about to say, I was just typing, but I was reading everybody else's first.
Yes.
I was going to say, when there's, things going on and everybody's collaborating and it's kind of, chatty and exciting in the office, everybody's kind of, excited to come in because we're putting something together or collaborating on something. I love that.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that, that I'm busy accomplishing meaningful tasks. Everyone else comes to work, which is that collaboration. So, I mean, just looking at these, so much of what engages us, I'm engaged with others, is the relationships with our team members, when we're doing exciting, engaging, meaningful work. I think a lot of times when people think what makes people happy in the office, they think, like, you don't see anything here about, I get my paycheck, or, I mean, not that people don't enjoy getting their paycheck, but, some of those things like having lunch, or it's what it really engages people is the interactions. It's the, but I think it's also important to note, I see, accomplishing goals. I think it's also important to note that not everyone is engaged by the same things. When I ask this question, and I've asked this to hundreds of people, I'll hear the relationships with coworkers. Some people don't necessarily mention the relationships. That might be when I'm doing interesting work or I'm learning something new. It's usually, when they feel excited, or they feel that sense of accomplishment, or that they had a good interaction with someone. And I always say that engagement in some ways is hard to define, because engagement isn't so much something, that you can easily put in a statement. It's kind of a feeling. It's that feeling of, I feel good. I feel good. I feel interested. I'm ready to have a good day. So, think about that feeling, not just for you, but what creates that feeling for others on your team, or maybe ask them to answer these kinds of statements and see how they respond. So while I said it is hard to define engagement, there is a formal definition. So engagement, I will say, engagement is not employee satisfaction. Employee engagement is not employee happiness. Employee engagement is the emotional commitment the employee has to the business and its goals. So I always say, especially to my non-HR practitioners, don't go back and say to employees, well, you don't need to be satisfied or happy. That's not what this is saying. You certainly want employees to be satisfied and you want them to be happy, but employee engagement is more than that. Because I can tell you that you could have someone who's very satisfied and happy in their job, but they're not necessarily engaged. I think we all know those employees who they're happy to come to work, collect their paycheck, chat with coworkers throughout the day. They enjoy their job, but at the end of the day, they're really not that committed to their work or to the organization or to the team. So that's why employee engagement is more than that. I will also say, I've seen people who are not necessarily what I would define as a happy employee that are extremely engaged. So for example, I worked with folks in banking. I have a couple individuals in mind that were in our operations department that were not necessarily the people that came to work every day with a smile on their face and looking at the glass half full as opposed to glass half empty. Had more of like more of an Eeyore type mentality, but they were extremely, extremely engaged and committed to the organization and were very positive in terms of their relationships with coworkers. So that's where I always say, don't confuse satisfaction and happiness with engagement. Engagement is really that next step. It's, the commitment to the work and to the team. So, and there's also a business case for employee engagement. And I bring this up, I'm sure if all of you on this call, I'm sure buy into the importance of employee engagement. But I can tell you, in being in the banking industry and also talking to business owners across all industries, I've definitely heard from individuals, employee engagement is fluff. It's nice to feel good, or but what's really the business? How's it going to help the bottom line? And I would argue that even if a business owner thinks that employee engagement is fluff or doesn't drive business results, they're sorely mistaken, because it really does impact the bottom line. And it's because those engaged employees who come to work every day, committed to their work, provide higher quality service, are more productive, which leads to higher customer satisfaction. A client or customer who interacts with a highly engaged employee is going to have a better experience, which then that customer or client is more likely to refer that business or that employee to their contacts, which obviously brings in more business, which leads to higher levels of profit and better business returns. So at the end of the day, I personally think employee engagement is important because you should want people to be engaged in their work and enjoy what they're doing, but it also does drive business results. And I can tell you that I have seen it firsthand. So, I shared that I helped drive employee engagement for our 100 branches in my market of M&T Bank. And one of the things that we did was we would, on an annual basis, survey all 600 plus of our employees. We would conduct an employee engagement survey and then would get numbers where we could see the average engagement across each branch, each region, and then across the market. I also had data on the performance side. We had performance scorecards for each branch where I could see how they were doing on meeting their goals and objectives. So were they meeting their deposit account goals? Were they meeting their home equity line goals? Were they meeting their productivity goals in terms of the number of clients that they were meeting with? And what always blew my mind was how closely correlated the employee engagement scores were with the performance. And one could say, well, of course, the branches who had higher levels of performance were going to be more engaged. But what was interesting is I would actually see engagement leading performance. So for example, if I saw a trend in a branch of engagement scores that went down or were slowly declining in a branch with high performance, eventually the performance would follow and we would see their goals and objectives. We would see the success in that start to drop. On the flip side, when I would start to see engagement climb within a branch, usually eventually the performance caught up and we would see their performance go up as well. To the point where I could actually talk to a regional manager and say, in advance, you need to get out in front of this branch because based on their engagement, I'm concerned the branch is going to start to suffer. Or the reverse. Hey, whatever that branch manager is doing is really working. Continue to encourage what they're doing right now, and you will see their performance increase. And I could do it with almost absolute certainty just based on those numbers. And so I think, like, you know, it's not just something we like to say, but I actually saw it firsthand, you know, just how important employee engagement is to business performance. So feel free to share that with any of your doubters out there. If you're in an HR role or someone who's driving employee engagement, you know, there really is a business case for it. Susan?
Kristen, do you have a, and maybe you're going to get to this, but do you have any suggestions? What we're noticing is people are 100% engaged when they come in, but now they've gotten used to, you know, working at home or being hybrid, and it's hard to convince people. Even, you know, we can give them the numbers and all that, and they know how they feel when they get there, but it's hard to convince people it really is better if you come into the office now. Are there any tricks? Are there any advice you can give to entice people to come back into the office so things can be more engaging?
So what I'm seeing a lot, I mean, there's certain industries that we work with where employees have had no choice. You know, they have to be in the office to do their job. So, you know, the retail sales, for example, or manufacturing. But, you know, I know for my team, I'm guessing many of you on the calls in professional service firms or nonprofits where people can work from home and can work remotely. I think the really important piece is the why. So, you know, if you're going to bring people into the office, to kind of show them the why behind having them in the office that day. So like I talked to a lot of those employees that you're mentioning, Susan, who are like, you know, my employer is making me come back into the office and I just want to work remotely. And what I find is there's a lot less pushback if when they show up in the office, there's those opportunities for collaboration. There's a team meeting. So like what I've really told, especially our professional service firms. So again, our consulting firms, accounting firms, law firms, IT companies, like people who, a lot of their team members can do a lot of their work effectively remotely. What we've been saying is like, look, maybe you don't have them come in every day in person, but we want you in person these 2 days a week, 3 days a week. And those days, here's the why behind that. We're gonna have those collaborative team meetings. You need to have at least one day where you have the opportunity to pop into coworkers' offices and socialize and learn a little bit more about what they have going on. So it's the why. Where I hear people get frustrated is if they come to the office and they're basically sitting in their office all day on their computer doing the exact same work that they could have done from home. So that's where I think as business leaders, we have to be really thoughtful about why and when we're bringing those folks who can work successfully from home into the office and clearly articulating to them the benefits of it. And then making sure when they're actually in the office that they reap those benefits. So if you see someone sitting in the office all day saying, hey, you know, come out, why don't we all have a chat? Or like finding ways to make sure that no one's sitting there thinking I could have done this from home. Does that?
Yeah, no, totally. And before you move on, I have another question because you were talking about the engagement survey. So before you move on from that, Emily Owens asks, can you share some details of how you conducted the engagement survey without it feeling like a big push and work to get the most accurate data? So if people are just filling out a survey because they have to, it's not gonna be the same as, you know, if they want to. So Any tips on that?
Absolutely. So I can, I mean, both from my internal experience as well as a consultant, I'll say M&T was very, very good about the employee engagement process. And there's a couple of best practices that I would recommend. The first is to have a regular cadence to it. So, whether you conduct it, usually I recommend annually. Some companies will do a shorter survey every quarter. You can do a regular survey annually, but make sure that you have a regular cadence to it so that employees grow to expect it. Then make sure that people understand, again, the why behind it. We're conducting this survey because your voice matters. We want to hear about your experience, how things are going. And, we would like to have a high level of participation because we want to hear as many voices as possible. Then once you push the survey out, making sure that it's easy to complete, send reminders, not so many reminders that it's annoying or that it feels like you're beating people to take it, but more if it's a week long, or I usually recommend doing it over 2 weeks in case you have people on vacation or out sick, so everyone has an opportunity. Making sure that you give them a reminder at like the week point, for example, and then at the end of the survey. I always say, though, never push for 100%. Like, I was always concerned if I had a region with 100%, because it usually meant that a regional manager was going around and telling every employee, like, you better take this. And, that's not, I usually shoot for, if I can get to like 80 to like 95%, I feel really good about that. So, not necessarily targeting 100%. And then I think the biggest piece, and especially if you're doing it on a regular basis, is the follow through. Is once you get the data, talking to senior management about the data, sharing the data in a transparent way with employees, conducting focus groups if necessary, and then communicating with employees at the end of every survey period, based on the survey, the focus groups, and what we've heard from you. Here are specific, and I usually do no more than 3, 5 at the very most. Here are the specific action items that we are going to take as an organization to address what we've heard, and then doing it. And what I found at M&T, because we did it every year, our process, we rolled it out to everyone. We did the focus groups, we communicated our action plans. Employees really start to trust the process and feel like, you know what, I should complete this survey because last year we completed the survey and this great thing happened. And so, why not go through that again? So I know that's somewhat of a long-winded answer, but as you can tell, I'm very passionate about employee engagement. And I think if you follow those things, it really does drive engagement. On the flip side, if you're spotty or you roll out a survey but then do nothing with it, that's when you start to lose the trust in the process and employees are more reluctant to complete the survey. Any other questions? All right, so I really like this particular slide, and I know it looks like a lot at first. I'm sure if I had a show of hands, I'm sure many of you have seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I think it's a really good way to think about employee engagement because I always think about employee engagement, this line here, like if you look at the base of this triangle, it's security and survival. And I think about this is really when we talk about like happiness or satisfaction, making sure your employees feel safe and secure is what keeps people from leaving. So, these are the two things that I think we've really seen kind of crumble over the course of the pandemic. So even those employees who previously felt very safe and secure in their position, my job is secure, my industry is secure, I feel safe. The pandemic challenged this base. Because all of a sudden, even people who felt very secure started having doubts. Am I safe going into the office? If I get COVID, what impact is that going to have on my health? What impact is it going to have on my family's health? Am I going to get paid? On the big picture, what kind of impact is COVID and the pandemic going to have on my industry? Is my business going to survive? Is my job even going to be here in 6 months? We've got kind of past that portion, but early on, a lot of people were feeling that. There was also, as we went through vaccine mandates, I talked to a lot of employees who were concerned, we have a vaccine mandate. I'm not vaccinated, or I don't plan to get vaccinated. Could I potentially lose my job? And so a lot of people who previously felt like I'm secure in my job, all of a sudden started feeling like I might not be safe and secure in my job. Either my health's not secure, my finances aren't secure, the business isn't secure. And that's where you see people fall off. So this is also, I've always talked about this even before the pandemic. The goal when you think about things like comp and benefits is to take these concerns off the table. Your goal from a comp and benefits and safety and security is to get people to this line where they feel safe and secure, and not just from a health or weather standpoint, as I think we've always talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but that they're able to provide for their family and that their job is predictable. So it's to get here. The way we motivate people is through the top of the triangle, creating that sense of belonging and importance and self-actualization, kind of going back to many of the statements that all of you made in talking about engagement, feeling like I belong with this team. What I do is important. I'm growing here and I'm learning. So, this again, I think we've seen a lot of the turnover we've seen is because this bottom fell out. But now that we're moving more towards the endemic side of the pandemic, I think it's going to be making sure, checking in with people, making sure they feel safe and secure from a health perspective, from a job perspective, that they don't feel like their job is challenged. But then really working on this upper portion of the triangle, that sense of belonging and importance and self-actualization, growth and learning. So I will say, as you can probably tell in me talking, employee engagement has been a part of my life for a very long time. I was working in employee engagement before it was cool. And one of the things that I came across a very long time ago that really just resonated with me was this book, The Truth About Employee Engagement, a fable about addressing the root causes of job misery, very long title, by Patrick Lencioni. And I will say, I probably sold several of Patrick's books for him. I have no affiliation with him, but I think very highly of him in his book. In this particular book, I'd encourage you, if you're a reader, to buy it. It's an easy book to pick up on Amazon, but I will summarize it for you. He says that there's 3 things that cause job misery and that force people to leave their jobs. And anonymity, irrelevance, and my least favorite word, immeasurement. And really what it comes down to is anonymity is I don't matter. Feeling like their job isn't, that they are not valued, that they don't matter. The next is irrelevance, which is more, my job doesn't matter. So, what I'm doing isn't necessarily important. And the measurement is, I don't really know what's expected of me or what success looks like. And basically, if people feel any one of those things, or especially all 3 of those things, so I don't matter, my job doesn't matter, I don't know what's expected of me, it causes people to be miserable in their jobs and for them to be highly disengaged and or leave. The good news is, and I'm a glass half full person, you can flip these. So, the inverse of this, not only keeps people from being disengaged, but actually engages people in their job. So making sure they feel valued, that they know their job matters, and that they know what's expected. So I'll talk to you a little bit about what that looks like in practice. So the first is addressing anonymity. And this is one of the lines from the book that really resonated. It's far more difficult to decide to leave an organization or a team when you feel that others on the team know and understand you as an individual. Now, I can't see all of you, you don't have your videos on, but I'm sure if I were to ask you, show of hands, who has stayed in a job for a little bit longer than they should have because of a connection with their boss or a team member, almost every single person would raise their hands, unless we have folks who have never left their job. I see Beth raising her hand. I mean, that's really, one of my first jobs, I knew I had outgrown my job, but I stayed an additional 2 years because I loved the people on my team. And I think that goes to show the importance of those relationships, with your team members and with your manager. So, for the business leaders on the call and managers, what can you do? So I think the real key is getting to know your employees. And I mean, really getting to know your employees. So as an HR professional, I tell people when they're interviewing, don't ask personal questions. You don't want to find out if someone has children. You don't want to find out if they're expecting. You don't need to know about their outside hobbies or, their religion or different things. Whereas when someone's within your organization, it's really important to get to know them, especially if you're their manager or direct teammate. Get to know their children, their significant other, those that are important to them. What are their hobbies outside of work? When they check out at the end of the day, what do they do in the evenings or weekends? Really getting to know them on a personal level. It's crazy to me how many times I'll talk to people and I'll realize that someone that they work with on a regular basis, they don't know whether they have a family or what their family members' names are. And I think, the best managers know those things about individuals. They're the managers who say, hey, didn't your son have a big baseball game this weekend? Did he win? Or I know your mother's been sick. How's she doing? Is she feeling better? Or, hey, how's that yoga class that you started taking going? Are you enjoying it? It's amazing. You see employees light up when managers or coworkers ask them those questions because it shows that they care and they've been paying attention. And it shows that genuine interest in them as an individual, not just as someone who's filing paperwork or completing a process. And the last is displaying care and empathy in times of need. So this one especially has been really, really important during the course of the pandemic. People want to know that their team has their back and really showing that that you care about what they're going through. And so I think right now, especially, it's important for managers to check in with people to say, how are you doing? Or if you know that an employee is struggling, check in with them. Because so many people have fallen out of the workforce because of childcare issues or health concerns, or again, safety concerns in the office. And I think, as business leaders, it's important that we show people that we care about those concerns and we'll work with them as much as we can while being fair and consistent across the board, then we'll work with them to resolve those concerns. So, that's a really important one. I've been telling all of my clients, people are going to remember the way they were treated over the course of the pandemic. And that's either going to leave a really positive taste in their mouth for their employer of my employer showed me a lot of care and empathy and I'm going to be loyal to my employer as a result, or my employer really didn't show me much care and empathy. And as a result, if I get that great offer from another organization, I am going to move on. So, it's really making sure people feel valued. So a couple best practices that I've seen, both as an internal practitioner and as a consultant, some people aren't good at building that natural connection with people or showing care and empathy, but I find that you need to make sure that you have certain things in place. So I recommend that all managers schedule employee one-on-ones, whether it's a short one-on-one on a weekly basis or a longer one-on-one on a monthly basis, but making sure that they're checking in with employees and asking the kinds of questions on this slide. So again, it's not about let's go through your job task list or your client list. It's asking questions like, how are you? What's the biggest challenge or obstacles you're facing? How can I help? How can I support you in your professional or personal goals? Again, making sure you're showing that you care about them more than just the task at hand, but about their professional development and how they're doing as a professional. The next best practice, which I find, I'll bring this up to people and they're like, I've never heard of this before. It's a very simple thing, is stay interviews. So many organizations will do exit interviews where they'll talk to people when they're leaving the organization to learn about that person's experience. But I found when I was internal, so many times an employee would say something to me in the exit interview where I couldn't help but think as an HR professional, if I had known this or the manager had known this 6 months ago, a year ago, we could have resolved this and kept this high potential employee. Maybe it's they were unhappy with their pay, or there was a coworker that made them feel uncomfortable, or the work that they were doing just wasn't exciting anymore. All of those things, if we knew before they resigned, could have been addressed and potentially save that employee. So I like to conduct stay interviews. So meeting, if not with all employees, at least those key employees that you want to make sure stay within the organization, sit down for lunch or coffee or a one-on-one conversation and ask the same kind of questions you'd ask in an exit interview. You know, like, what do you like about working here? What do you look forward to? AKA, what engages you? If you could change something about your job or the company, what would it be? You know, I'll often say, like, if you could wave a magic wand or you were in charge for a day, what would you change? What motivates you or demotivates you? And if you're feeling really gutsy, and it's amazing how people will respond to this, asking them, you know, hey, we really value you. We love having you on the team. You know, there has been turnover across the industry. What might tempt you to leave? And, you know, and it's amazing what people will say, well, honestly, nothing would really tempt me to leave, or, you know, a little bit more money or the ability to get experience in this particular area of the industry. And then you can work to proactively stave that off instead of waiting until that person is submitting that resignation. So stay interviews are a really great best practice. And then also at the team level, informal check-ins and committing to regular team meetings, especially in the virtual world. I think just having all of these scheduled, especially one-on-ones, whenever people are in the office, it's like, well, I'm checking in with people on a regular basis. Well, working virtually, maybe not. And so, you know, I put these meetings on my calendar, the employee's calendar, and really am hesitant to reschedule unless there's a really big conflict, and only reschedule within a 24 or 48-hour period, just to show, again, like the survey, these meetings are important. I'm going to commit to it and I'm going to follow through. So I saw we had a couple comments posted up. Was there a question in there, Susan?
There is. Beth, if you could chime in and let me know, are you talking about not someone that works for you, correct? But somebody else. Okay.
Yeah.
She says that she has a client who is so disengaged from his employees. What would be a good way to suggest he do some of these things? So he's not motivated to do some of these things, and Beth is in a position to give him, you know, advice on how to get better engaged with his employees. And she goes on to say that there's so much resentment from his workforce, but it sounds like he doesn't even maybe notice it, know that he needs to do things to engage. So she's wanting to know what is a good way to suggest.
Oh, show him this presentation deck. but I think stress to him, you know, people are more willing to give discretionary effort to show up and really commit to their job when they feel like the team, and specifically their manager and the business owner, cares about them. And also, you learn a lot from talking to your employees. Not just about them, but also about the business, what's going well, not going well. I think sometimes people are hesitant. Again, not everyone is a people person. They're not exactly sure when they get into those conversations what to say. And so, I mean, I would start with encouraging him, you know, one, hey, I think you're going to get a better result, and you're going to see, you know, more effort out of your employees, and you're going to be able to better manage them if you really get to know them. Encourage him to start small, even just schedule a 15-minute, half an hour meeting with each employee. If you have a good relationship with them or someone in the office, making sure they know this isn't because sometimes if they don't trust the manager, they might say, well, why is he meeting with me? I mean, really giving them the why of, you know, really want to get to know all of you. And I really want to hear about how you're feeling about your job. And then having him schedule the meetings and giving him like these types of questions so that, you know, he really knows, because even these are great questions in that, like, the biggest challenges and obstacles you're facing, how can I help? Not only will it help him get to know his employees, it'll also help him understand how to better run the business. Because those line employees are going to give him information. When he hears about their challenges or obstacles, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't hear common trends that he as a business owner will be able to influence. So Beth, does that help, or any other questions or comments on that? But I would start with giving him an agenda, giving him like here's how often you should meet with him. Here are some questions that you can ask, so that he's not just going into it like, well, why am I talking to them and what am I talking about? Say it. Okay,
Yes,
perfect.
I think you answered a question. Yes.
Perfect. So now to go, there we go. So addressing your relevance. So one of the biggest things that always would strike me, I would go around when I was internal to branches, and there's one phrase there's two phrases I really hate. First phrase that I really hate as an HR professional is, I'm fine. And that's because anytime an employee says I'm fine, that's usually especially to an HR professional and a manager, that's a red alert, I am not fine. and to ask other questions. One of the other phrases that really goes to irrelevance is when I would hear, if I were in a branch and I would hear a teller or I would hear a relationship banker or someone say, I'm just a teller, what can I do? Or I'm just a branch manager, no one cares about my opinion. When you hear someone say, I'm just, that is the red alert that they're feeling irrelevant, that their job doesn't matter. And, again, here's another phrase from the book that really resonated with me. Human beings need to be needed. Everyone needs to know that their work is important to someone. Most of us spend 30, 40, 50, 60 hours a week in our jobs. It's very difficult if you feel like those 40, 50, 60 hours a week are for nothing and that you don't matter and that your job's not important. So that's where it really comes down to showing people why their job matters. And I think sometimes people think that jobs only matter to the level of their position. So, people think like, well, someone at the top is relevant, but a lot of times I'll hear like, I'm just from, entry level positions, and that is just not true. And I'll tell you, I've seen high level executives, very well comped, that felt irrelevant. And I've seen entry level employees or employees that people would think this wouldn't feel relevant, really get this and understand why their job's important. One of the best examples I always give is we had a gentleman that worked in maintenance when I was in bank. His name was Charles. He was the most positive, engaged person that I ever worked with. He was always there on time. The whole building was always in perfect, and it was a very, very old building, I should mention, out in Western Maryland. It was always spick and span. Everything was always well maintained. He always greeted everyone with a smile. And I remember he would say, I have one of the most important jobs because my job is to make sure that when people walk in the building, that they feel safe and this is a place where they want to work. I mean, talk about getting, your job. As he realized that his job, it would have been easy for him to say, well, I'm just the maintenance guy. But he realized what an impact he could have, not just in making sure we had a nice environment to work in, but even just how he himself showed up, the whistling and saying hi and greeting everyone with a smile, just how important his job was. So I think when you see an employee who says, I'm just, I often, when I hear people say that, I start with like, well, who are you helping? We all are helping someone in their job, and how are you helping them? And, and sometimes it's harder for people to see that direct correlation, but it's really helping them see, for example, the teller that would say, I'm just a teller. I would tell them, no one cares. They would say, well, you're a vice president, or, Steve, the market manager, is the market manager. I'd be like, no one cares about us. No one sees us. The clients that come in, they couldn't tell you my name. They know that teller that they come in and they see that's a smiling face that greets them and runs their transactions for them. That's that client's experience of the bank. When the person comes in with a tough financial question, or maybe they lost a family member and they need to open up or close up accounts, like the teller is the person who's there for them. And I think, helping people realize that it's not your title, the amount that you're paid, that makes you important or relevant. It's the impact that you have. And also empowering people to make decisions within that. So, if they help a person, allowing them to help clients or customers and making sure that they know that they're empowered to make decisions. So I know, like, I'm a
Susan, I
big
think
fact person. Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's reminding me of the hip phrase right now. They understood the assignment. You know?
Yes. It's so true.
And helping your employees to understand the assignment is what I think what you're getting at.
I love it, Susan. I'm going to have to steal that in a future presentation. That's truly what it is, that they understand the assignment and they understand the importance of the assignment, and you know, that they are needed in a vital part. You know, another thought leader that I think very highly of is Adam Grant. He's an organizational psychologist and professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and he says that spending even 5 minutes hearing about the work that you do and the impact that it has on the end user or client can increase productivity by 500%. You know, and this was a study done by the University of Pennsylvania. Now, I would say, even if it's not 500%, even if it's 200%, how powerful is that? And so, you know, think about not just at the individual level, but at the company level. How can your employees see, you know, whether it's hearing testimonials from clients or customers, you know, you sharing emails that you receive from clients or customers talking about how the business or organization impacted them in their life in a positive way, sharing that with employees, and especially those employees like back office employees, for example, who might not get to hear and see that from clients or customers on a daily basis. But at the end of the day, the work they do still enables that positive impact at the end of the day. You know, the people that are servicing the clients and the customers on the front end couldn't function if it weren't for the finance and accounting team in the back office, making sure that all the finances and everything of the business are working. So like really helping people understand their piece of the puzzle and making sure they understand the assignment. The last is addressing and measurement. So, you know, great employees do not want their success to depend on the subjective opinions of another human being. You know, I can think pretty much all of us can probably think of an example where someone, you know, critiqued us or judged us in a way that we were like, well, I'm not exactly sure. That feels like a subjective opinion to me. Or like, you know, I don't know. You know, I've even seen it with managers where I see managers rating employees in performance evaluations where I'll push back and say, are these your opinions or do you have facts to back it up? And I think, you know, it's very, very important that people trust the metrics and the way that their performance is being measured. And the way to do that is kind of these points here. First, identifying areas an employee can directly influence. So I find people get really disengaged when they feel like they're being held accountable for a goal that they really don't have influence over, that someone else on the team has, but they really can't have an impact on it. And then ensuring that there's specific measurements that are connected to those goals or objectives. And I find too, especially if you're dealing, I don't know how many of you are in sales cultures, but sometimes like it's one thing to say, well, you know, we have a goal of $1 million. Okay, great, but what does that look like? You know, people can't necessarily influence bringing in $1 million. You know, I can't just say, hey, and $1 million of sales is going to fall out of the air. What I can directly influence or I have control over is my behaviors and activities. So maybe it's, you know, scheduling so many meetings or conducting, and I know this doesn't necessarily apply for all positions. I'm just talking in relation to a sales position, but it can be applied to any position. Like, what are the activities or behaviors that employee actually has influence or can follow through on? And then the numbers or the outcomes will follow, if that makes sense. I think sometimes we focus too much on the outcomes or the numbers and not as much on the behaviors or activities that get there. And then, you know, clearly communicating your expectation to employees in a way that's clear and meaningful to them, even to the point of when I'm talking about, you know, expectations, you know, asking, does that make sense? Do you think this is achievable? Do you have any questions? To make sure that you and the employee, whether you're rolling out just an isolated assignment or, you know, quarterly or annual goals and objectives, that there's no questions, that you and the employee are on the same page, the employee knows what's expected, and then checking in regularly. You know, do these goals and objectives still make sense? Do you need help and support in meeting these goals and objectives? Because I find especially, yeah, the irony is, especially high achievers, which are usually the employees that you want to keep, people get really frustrated if they feel like they don't know how to get that A. High achievers usually want that A. They want that pat on the back from their manager. And if they feel like they don't know how to get it, they become disengaged. So it's making sure that they know what success looks like so that they can meet or achieve those expectations. And also that they feel like the expectations are achievable and something that's fair. So just as, because I know we're coming up on time here, and I do want to leave just a few minutes for questions, just some best practices to highlight. And we've talked about all these, but just to kind of like reinforce, these are the things across my clients that I see have the most engaged teams. There's kind of a special sauce. And I find out that these are the things that those clients tend to do consistently. One, they provide regular and transparent communication. I think that's been especially important during the pandemic. You know, even though there's been times during the pandemic where business leaders might not actually have an answer, you know, not necessarily know where we were headed with the pandemic, not know exactly what was going to happen with the business, being transparent in that. Hey, here's the concerns that we know are out there. Here's what we're doing to address them. There's still some things that we're working through. We're going to regularly communicate with you. The biggest piece is that making sure that employees trust the information that's coming from leadership and that they know that you're regularly going to communicate with them in an open and honest way. The next is showing appreciation. And again, that goes back to making people feel valued and needed. You know, making sure that you show appreciation for them and for the job that they do. And really making sure you appreciate them in a way that's meaningful for them. So one thing I find is sometimes employers will have like a one go-to way of showing appreciation. So maybe, you know, recognition during a team meeting. Well, it turns out that half of their team hates public recognition. I think it's important that when you're doing one-on-ones with employees, this is another thing you could touch upon. Hey, Susan, how do you like to be appreciated? So that if I have something that I want to show Susan my appreciation, I'm showing her that appreciation in a way that's meaningful for her and not in a way that makes her feel uncomfortable or embarrassed. The next is articulating connection to organizational purpose. And that, again, comes back to the relevance, making sure people understand how their job fits into the big picture and how the organization positively impacts clients and customers or the community at large. The next is building community. So it goes back to when Susan was talking about bringing people into the office or finding ways to engage people remotely. You know, my best clients really find ways to connect with people, not just on the job itself, but connecting on a more personal level and making sure that people feel connected. You know, whether it's through team meetings, team building activities, information sharing, just finding ways to make that connection. The next is showing employees care and empathy. Again, a really big one in pandemic times, making sure when people do have those health concerns, concerns about where the industry is headed, concerns about turnover, whatever it may be, that you give a listening ear and show that you care, you know, and we'll work to help them through those concerns. And then providing development and growth opportunities. You know, again, that goes to the pyramid again and the self-actualization, making sure that people don't feel stagnant in their job and that they feel like they're constantly growing personally and professionally and that their job is a way to help them do that. So those are some of the best practices. You know, one thing I would leave you with, and then I know we're at time, I don't know if we have a few extra minutes for anyone to ask questions, but I would have you all ask yourselves coming off of this webinar, I'm a big, what are you going to do with this information? I think so many times we sit through webinars or we think about a topic and then we don't actually take action. So I would highly encourage you, as your assignment from this webinar, is to really reflect on these two questions. One, what is one thing you will do in 2022 to better engage your team, whether it's something we discussed on this webinar or something that you've heard about, you know, as a best practice? And then how can you or your managers ensure that you're connecting with each of your employees on a regular basis? Because again, if you do nothing else, I think that is the key, because if managers are meeting with employees on a regular basis and having the right kinds of conversations, a lot of these other things are going to naturally take care of themselves. So really reflect on those two questions and maybe write down a little action plan for yourself. So I'm going to, because I know many of you will have to jump. I can stay around for a few minutes if anyone has questions, but I want to thank all of you for your time today. This is a very important topic, and it was a pleasure engaging with all of you.
Kristen, I do want to, before everybody jumps off, if you have another minute, Tim, were you recommending a book? I'm not exactly sure what QBQ means, but and I think you were addressing back when Beth was asking about how to get her client more engaged with his own employees. Tim, do you want to clarify? Is this a book that you're recommending? You can jump off mute if you want to answer, or you can just, question behind the question. Okay.
You know what, Tim? I don't think I've ever read that one. I'll have to pick that up myself.
Great. And yeah, just real quick, if anybody has any general comments or questions, feel free to jump in real quick. We're just a minute over, but if you have another minute or two. So yeah, Tim says it's fantastic. So Beth, and he put some advice in there in the chat, if you can see it, on some things that you can, you already looked it up on Amazon.
Clearly Beth's like me. If I weren't presenting, I would have been on my phone ordering it on Amazon when Tim put it out there.
So that's great. So Kristen, wow, great information. I'm not even an HR person, and I don't even manage people. I manage events.
But it impacts us all. I mean,
it really
employee
does.
engagement, again, it impacts us all, because at the end of the day, being engaged ourselves and working with engaged teammates is what makes work fun and worthwhile. And so, you know, we should all want to be engaged in our work.
Yeah. This applies to everybody, whether you're a manager or a coworker or, you know, an employee that is feeling a little lost, you know, get engaged. And if you're a manager, let's push people to get engaged. So,
and if someone's, and honestly, if someone's disengaged in their job for an extended period of time, and the manager and the teams work with them, sometimes it's just a sign that the person isn't in the right job for them. And I've had those difficult conversations with employees to say, almost give them permission. Like, it's okay. If this job isn't the right job for you and isn't fulfilling your personal and professional goals, let's help you figure out that next step. Like, what would be a good fit for you? Whether it's within the organization or outside of the organization. Because at the end of the day, who wants to go through life? And I think that's what we've seen in the Great Resignation. Who wants to go through life feeling disengaged in their job? And it's one thing to feel disengaged for a day or a week or a month, but to feel disengaged month on month, year on year, you know, it's not a fulfilling way to spend those 40 plus hours a week.
Right. Well, good stuff, Beth. Kristen, thank you so much. Yes. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Don't forget to tune in to our next week's webinar, and then we'll have the rescheduled webinar from last week on May 19th. And be on the lookout for a email with all these resources, all Kristen's good information in her slide deck, as well as the recording from this session.